I welcome our today's speaker, Karthik sir. Welcome, sir. Sir, am I audible?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. Good morning. Welcome. Thank you.
Yeah, on behalf of Atal FDP and KLN College of Engineering, I welcome all the participants for the second day of this program. I request Dr. Vimala Rani to introduce today's speaker. Madam, please.
A warm welcome and very good morning to one and all present here. I am Dr. C. Vimala Rani from EEE Department, KLN College of Engineering. I welcome our resource person, Mr. Karthik sir, for this session of second day of this FTP. Now I find immense pleasure in introducing our resource person, Mr. Karthik sir. He is a dual degree undergraduate with masters in data science from Indian Institute of Technology, Madras. He is currently working as a machine learning engineer at MedStreet Dunn in Algorithms Division. His core interests lie in deep neural networks and tree-based algorithms. He was previously worked as an intern in Caterpillar, Steel Lab Technologies, and Gruffuss. I once again welcome you, sir. His picture in the poster remember me one word that he is a young mind of today and responsible citizen of tomorrow. Yes, now I hand over the session to Mr. Karthik, sir. Please, sir.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you for the warm welcome.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah, I'll start the presentation now.
Okay.
Is my screen visible?
Yes, sir, visible.
Sure. Thank you. Good morning to one and all present here. I'm Karthik. So today I'm going to present you, give an idea about machine learning and its fundamentals. Yeah, already ma'am gave a warm introduction about me, so I don't think I want to go back again. So let's directly dive into the action plan. So this is what I planned today. We are actually slightly behind the schedule, but let me try to cover it up. So initially we'll just see about machine learning, an overview about it, like what is it, some examples. Then we'll look at predictive modeling, which is the first step of the machine learning. Then we'll see some few examples on regression and classification. And the last 10 minutes, we'll have some question and answer session so that it's kind of interactive. And yeah, you can stop me at any time in between if you have some doubts or if you feel something is wrong in the slides. I'm happy to stop and explain you. And sometimes I'll try to make it as interactive as possible. So let's start doing. Okay, what is machine learning? This is the one of the most common question now because it's a very developing field. It's a boom now, to be frank, in the Silicon Valley. But what is machine learning? Let us see. This is Dr. Arthur Samuel, one of the pioneers in computer science, and how he defines machine learning is: machine learning is a field of study that gives computers the ability to learn without explicitly being programmed. So what does this actually mean? What does actually mean? Suppose, let me explain you with an example. I'm asking you to find a twin prime number. So twin prime number is nothing but a prime. Suppose if I give you two numbers will be a twin prime if both the numbers are prime numbers and their difference is 2. So that is actually called as a prime number, twin prime number. So if someone comes and asks you to write a code about twin prime, this is what you will do, right? You just go to you just start opening a Python console. Like the naive approach is to take the two numbers, check if it's prime or not, and check if the difference is 2 or not, and you will find you'll tell whether it's twin prime or not. So this is how a traditional programming approach works. Too many if else conditions. I hope you just got an idea about it. But what does machine learning do? Machine learning is nothing but you'll give some few examples. For example, here you are giving 3, 5 is a true. Like 3, 5 is a twin prime. 1, 2 is not a twin prime. 137, 139 is a twin prime. And these two examples are not twin prime. And this is a twin prime number. So you'll give the examples, you will give the data. You give the data to the computer, you feed the data to the computer, and the computer itself observes from the data, not like it learns from the pattern, and it by itself build a black box or model. So which means like you need not explicitly program as if and else. So so that is the power of machine learning. So that's how this figure presents you. In traditional programming, what you do is you have a data, but with the data, you yourself write the logic. You write the data, you write the logic, and you give the output. This is the traditional programming. But in machine learning, what you do is you give the data, you give the expected output, and you tell computer, hey, computer, learn from this data and give me a logic. So that's what is machine learning. So you're making the machine to learn. And that's why it is also called as an artificial intelligence. This field is widely called as. Okay. Now, in this case, it's very easy because you're giving two numbers and asking it to find, asking it whether it's a twin prime or not. You can easily program by this approach because it's like seven lines of code you can write. But what if someone asks you to give an image and find whether the image is a cat or dog? Can someone from audience like give a naive approach, like how can we go about it? I hope my question is clear. In the past case, we are asked to find given two numbers are twin prime or not. In that case, it is very easy. The logic is very easy. So you wrote a piece of code and you executed it. But in this case, I'm giving you like they will give you an image and you have to find whether it's a cat or a dog. How to go about the logic? Someone from the audience, please. Okay, in the interest of time, I'll myself will explain about this. So the naive approach is to look for the patterns. For example, you could see the cat has a whiskers here, but dog doesn't have a whisker. So which means that you can feed in the whisker.
Sir, sorry to disturb. A participant asked to repeat the question, sir.
Oh, sorry. My question is: in the previous case, we had like what we want to do is given two numbers, we want to find if it is a twin prime or not. In this case, it is very easy because we already know the logic. So we using the logic, we figured out this code. We wrote this code and we executed it. Fine. Now, if suppose someone is asking you to write a program that could differentiate between cat and dog, that is, given an image, you need to tell me if it's a cat or dog. That is the question. So the question is like, how will you go about it? How will you start writing the logic for this particular problem?
Participants, you can give your reply in the chat box. Or if you wish, you may unmute the mic after typing your name. Assess the difference between the images. One participant has given the answer.
That's good. That's one of the things. Image pattern, that's very good. Yeah, that's another good thing.
Another participant has given the answer as image pattern.
Cool. That's nice. Pattern recognition.
Pattern recognition, image differencing.
Yeah, that's cool. That's a very this is the direction where I expected it to go. It's fine. So one thing what we can do is we can tell them, suppose we can tell the this is suppose let's say it's 720 x 720 pixels. What we will actually do is tell the computer to just look at this pixel and look for this whiskers or something. As you could see, the whiskers is here. But the problem is you can't write a if-else condition for everything. For example, in this case, the cat is somewhere in the background and the image is not clear. So exactly, if-else pattern recognition won't work. In that case, that's the case where machine learning comes into play. You give the image, tell it to observe the pattern on its own. Like, hey, this is the image of cat and a dog. Please learn and please learn the features by yourself. So that is the difference between a traditional programming and a machine learning. So suppose like some people confuse between image recognition and machine learning. So image processing and machine learning. What does image processing do is you already have a filter. Say suppose you have a edge filter or a hawk filter. You have those filters in your hand and you process it and you observe it. But in machine learning, you yourself, the computer by itself will create its own filter. You need not tell the filter explicitly. So that's the difference between a traditional programming and a machine learning. And this is another cool example. A computer program is set to learn from experience E with respect to some class of task T and a performance measure P. If its performance as task C improved as measured by P improves with experience E. So this is one of the coolest example one could give, because experience C here refers to the data you give. So more the data you give, the more the performance will be, performance measure. And this is with respect to a particular task. For example, in last case, it was recognizing cats versus dogs. In some cases, it might be recognizing, say, image identification. For example, nowadays in classrooms, it is hard to take attendance for each and everyone. Now, colleges in USA are coming up with the image recognition technology. Suppose like you enter the class, it takes a photo of you and it identifies who you are. So this is what happens. Let us take some examples. I hope you would have watched Iron Man. Like, it's one of the famous movie in Hollywood. And there is one character called Jarvis. It's an artificial intelligence agent. So, like, as you could see in the image, in the movie, Iron Man interacts with Jarvis. Like, for example, he will tell like, "What's my body condition?" and Jarvis will reply for it. So this is a very forward example. Like, this is an artificial example for which I just took. But we are not so close to Jarvis. But we did make some advancements in real life. For example, there is a virtual assistant for you. Amazon Alexa, Microsoft Cortana, Google's Google Assistant, Apple's Siri. So these are your virtual assistants. So I guess most of you must have worked with these virtual assistants. Suppose say I'm using a Windows laptop now. For example, sometimes if I want to know the temperature of the city, I'll just say, "Hey Cortana, tell me what is the city." This is what I will do. And the Cortana is a software that takes your voice as input and generates a reply. The reply is the output. So everything in this process is completely based on machine learning techniques. To be very precise, it's based on recurrent neural networks. This is one of the common thing we use, Google Maps, in our day-to-day life. Suppose say if you have to visit from one place to another, the first thing we do is to check the time or distance of the route. So this is the background. The background time that used to calculate is a output of a machine learning model. Facebook tagging. How much times like have you just see when you upload a photo, the Facebook automatically looks at your recognize your face and ask you like if this person is the same. So this is called as Facebook's auto tagging procedure. It's a proprietary algorithm for Facebook. Still, it is not out in as an open source. So that Facebook tagging is entirely based on machine learning. So that's how machine learning is embedded into each and every part of our life. We might not notice it, but each and every data gives some advancement. Each and every data gives some idea, and and to enhance your services, especially like Facebook, Google, as well as Amazon. Those things, machine learning is prevalent everywhere now. As you could see, this is one of the projects which we are working in our company. So like we actually work in a retail automation sector. Suppose our project is, suppose if you given size of if you given an image of dress, it will automatically find the tags like casual dress, shirt dress, collar, 3/4 sleeve, tie length, and everything. You will find it out. So this is instead of someone sitting in the background and manually tagging it. So this is the power of machine learning. We saw some good examples. Now let me take you to supervised learning. So there is difference between supervised learning and unsupervised learning. Like machine learning on a whole, it is divided into supervised and unsupervised learning. So in this case, let us see cats versus dogs. We have the image. Image is the data. We have the image as the data, and we have an output. If it is a cat or not. So we have the output. So we have the input as well as the expected output. So that is supervised learning. Each training example has a ground truth label. That is, you have an input example as well as its expected output. In this case, it's a very naive data points in a 2D plane, and you have different data points scattered around it, and you have the blue as one class and red as another class. So here you have the data as well as the expected output. So in this case, it is these types of problem is called as supervised learning, where you can, as we will see very soon, we'll have two major supervised learning tasks, namely regression and classification. We'll just explore it further. This is unsupervised learning. You just have the data. You don't have any explicit label, but you have to identify the pattern of the what is the pattern behind the data. So this is like training examples do not have any ground truth labels. That is, you just have the data. There's no specific output, but you have to just identify some patterns in the data. For example, in this data, we can find some few clusters, like these data points are clustered together. These data points are clustered together. So you automatically find the number of clusters. So this is called unsupervised learning, where you don't have an explicit label. A very common example where you can find is, have you ever wondered, like, suppose say if you want to buy a shoe, you go to Amazon, search for shoe, search like 10 times, like different shoes. After a point of time, whatever the advertisements you see in the Google ads or YouTube ads, it will be based on shoes. Have anyone observed that? Something in the chat box. Oh, what I'm telling is, suppose say if you're searching about shoes in Amazon site, thank you. So yeah, that's one of the machine learning tasks performed by Amazon called as the customer segmentation. So what it does is whenever you search the data in Amazon or Google, the background cookies capture the data and send to the companies for their inference. And what actually happens is there is something called as customer segmentation. So they segment you towards the products and make you analyze things. So this is what happens in unsupervised learning. And this is the brief branch about, like not a brief, this is the expanded branch about machine learning. So that is supervised learning, and you have different tasks and examples like classification, regression, weather forecasting, market forecasting, customer retention, image classification. So these are supervised learnings. And unsupervised learning is customer segmentation, recommender systems, big data, everything comes under unsupervised. And reinforcement learnings, real-time decisions, robot navigation, learning tasks, skill acquisition, and game AI. So reinforcement learning is a very new and a very specific topic, because it doesn't generally come under machine learning. People don't generally see it under machine learning. So, but a good example is like nowadays people are so hell-bent on developing cars, self-driving cars. Uber is investing. Google has been investing a lot of money on self-driving cars. So those self-driving cars use this reinforcement learning algorithms. So let's dive into the actual practice, predictive modeling. So before you start a machine learning problem, you need to identify the variables, like how it will be, what variable need. Suppose for example, Y is like, suppose if you have to predict the next day's stock price, what features will be you must use. That is more important in machine learning. So let us take a quick dive into statistics and move into the example part. Suppose there are n observations for variable x and y. We all know mean. That is just an average. So we take the mean of two variables, x bar and y bar, and we also find the sample variances. Now covariance is something, it's a most important feature in any predictive modeling process. Suppose for example, s of x comma y is 1 by n into sigma of, that is like for each and every example. You suppose you have n observations. For each and every observations, you subtract it with the mean, and you for the two variables, multiply it and sum it over all the observations. This is called sample covariance. This covariance is very important in identifying the dependent variables, like which variable can give you a good idea about the machine learning problem. Now, as you could notice, suppose say, if x increases, y increases, what will the sample covariance be? Someone in the audience, please use the chat box. My question is, there are two variables, x and y. You have n observations. Suppose if x increases, y also increases. what will the sample covariance be? Will it be positive? Will it be high, or will it be low? Something, some observations in the chat box, please. Is my question clear? If it is not, please let me know. I can repeat it again. I'll give it a minute or two, or a minute, and if not, I'll just proceed. I'll just repeat the question again. There are two variables, x and y, and there are n observations. Suppose if x increases, y also increases. What will be the sample covariance be? Will it be positive? Will it be negative? Or will it be high? Or will it be low? Any other any observations which you feel? Yeah, cool. It's positive. That's nice. It's positive because as x increases, sorry, as if x increases, y also increases. Then the x minus x bar and y minus y bars sign will be same. So either it will be positive into positive or negative into negative. So it will add together, and so the entire term will be positive. So the sample covariance will be highly positive. If not, it will be negative. So that's how you just check for the sample covariance. Suppose if it is highly positive and if it's a very big number, then means that x and y are related so good. So which means that x is a good indicator variable for y. Then you can tell your machine learning algorithm to tell, hey, take this x data and predict me y data. So that's how machine learning works. So you have to choose the variables. So this is correlation, which is an extension of covariance. Only difference is that in covariance you don't normalize to anything because there is no you can't predict the magnitude. Suppose x is in kilometers and y is in meters, it doesn't make sense, right? So what we actually do is we scale it with the variance so that the scale is always between -1 to 1. So when you take the value of the correlation will be -1 to 1. So 1 is a positive correlation and -1 is a negative correlation, and R of x comma y means zero correlation. So this R of x comma y will take the covariance and scale it to -1 to 1. So let us go through some examples and see like if you actually got an idea or not. Suppose x is a let's say like x is a variable and y is a variable, and tell me if it is a strong positive correlation or strong negative correlation. Let's say, suppose if x is Sunday or not, and y is the restaurant sale, how do you think x and y are correlated? If it is like I'll repeat the question. Suppose we have two variables x and y. Suppose if x is if Sunday or not, and y is a restaurant sale, what is the correlation score? Like how will the correlation be? Will it be positive or negative? It's not exactly weak, right? Like for example, compared to a weekday, weekend sales is more because families go out, hang out in restaurants. So in that logic, like, I took that logic actually, but it need not. There's no one true correct answer for it. But yeah, someone in the audience, I think I am hearing some mic sound. Okay, cool. Yeah, it's positive. As some people have pointed out, it's positive. Strong positive correlation. And please don't. This is just an artificial example, and I just don't take it too much offend. Like don't get offended by it. It's just the example for sarcasm. Suppose say if it's so let's say like if bribe given to an official in some country like Nigeria, and the time for finishing the work, it's strong negative correlation because like the more the bribe you give, the less the time to finish work. So I just give this example for common good. Let's take like now temperature of the city and ice cream sales. How do you think these two variables are related? Suppose say x is the temperature of city and y is then ice cream sale. How do you think these two are related? Uh, it's not very strong positive. Like okay, now come again. I'm coming again. If X is the temperature of city and Y is ice cream sale, how will you think the model will be? Someone in the participants, like, will it be positive, negative, strong or medium? Cool, that's good. Medium positive, moderate positive correlation, because you can't actually tell like still right, because in countries like Germany, still the ice cream sales goes good despite the temperature being very low. And now let's quickly look at another example. Runs scored by in India in World Cup, and if the match is a playoff, semi-final or final, how do you think it's correlated? Again, it's just another example. So yeah, someone has given an answer. It's medium negative correlation, because I started watching cricket from 2000s, because I'm like that's the starting point of how I watch cricket. And one pattern I observe is India will play very good in every other matches except the playoffs. So in case of this, runs scored by India in World Cup, and if the match is the playoff, then it's a moderate negative correlation. That's what I have observed. And the last example we'll see is stock price of Google and weather in Chennai. How do you think it's correlated? Anyone from the audience? I repeat, stock price of Google and weather in Chennai. How do you think it's correlated? We can't say negative, because in the last two cases we have negative correlations, because we know properly, because as bribe increases, time decreases. As matches a playoff, or if matches a playoff, if it is true, then the runs decreases. So here it's like there is a negative trend, but in this case there is no trend. See, there is the stock price of Google and weather price of Chennai, like that there's no sense in the data, so like it has no correlation. So now when it comes to machine learning, what you have to actually do is to suppose say if you're like whatever you have to predict is Y. Suppose say let's take an example. Suppose if you have to predict the power output of a plant, electrical plant. Suppose that is variable Y. In order to select the variable X, you need to select X in such a way that it has either strong positive correlation or negative correlation. The correlation factor is a very important thing, because that just tells about how X influences Y. So that's before designing a machine learning problem, make sure that your input data is related to the output data as well as it is strong enough. So that's the predictive modeling part. So let's dive into the regression part. Okay. So this is the regression's goal. What we have to do is you're having a data of x1, x2, and y, where x1 and x2 are the inputs or features, and y is the output. The goal of the regression is to predict y given x1 and x2. This is the goal of the regression. And the very basic thing you can do is fit a line. You can fit a line. That is here. That is what is here. This is called as linear regression. That is, prediction of y is a sum of linear combination, theta naught plus theta 1 x1 plus theta 2 x2. So here x1 is a feature, x2 is a feature. You have to predict the output y. Sometimes you can't predict the output y exactly. So that's what here. That's what the symbol is here. Expectation of y. Expectation of y tells us that your prediction. So your prediction is equal to theta naught plus theta 1 x1 plus theta 2 x2. Where x1 and x2 we take from data, we take y from data. What we have to actually predict in this case is theta naught, theta 1, and theta 2. This is what we have to learn from the data. So this is called as linear regression. This is one of the classic examples taken from Andrew Ng machine learning lectures from YouTube. I just took this from his lectures. Suppose say, given the size of the house, you have to predict the price. So what you can do is, instead of here we have two variables, x1 and x2. Let us take there is just a single variable x, where x is the size of the building. So what we do is, linear regression is nothing but fitting a curve, and linear regression is nothing but fitting a line. So this is, in the first case, it is called as the linear regression. So theta naught plus theta 1x. So that is called as that is our model. So what we have to do is, we have to predict theta and theta 1 in such a way that our prediction or our line is close to the real world data points. For example, here the x is the real data points. It's a real world data points. Like this is the actual data, and the blue line is the predicted data. So regression is nothing but curve fitting. So now, this is an example of a linear regression. And when you add some polynomial term into it, so can someone in the audience tell what does this equation represent? Like this is a straight line, equation of a straight line, y is equal to mx plus c. And what does this represent? What curve does this represent? Someone from the audience? I repeat my question. This is the exact example of an straight line equation. Y is equal, like expectation of y is equal to theta 1x plus theta naught. This like similar to y is equal to mx plus c, this is a straight line. But here we have another curve, theta naught to theta 1x plus theta 2x square. So what does this curve represent? Which polynomial regression? Yeah, but what curve is it? So okay, let me give it the answer since it's more convoluted. So this can be a parabola or a hyperbola or an ellipse, depending on what is theta 1, theta 2, and theta naught. Now, as you could see, when you increase the complexity from linear regression to a polynomial regression, now your curve is very close to the real world data points. As you can see, like the error is very less. So which means it's a better model. Okay, and you can keep on increasing. I can keep on increasing x powers. For example, here we have x power 4, and so can someone think of what can go wrong in this case? As you can see, this is an okay-ish fitting. This is a good fitting. The curve is very close to the real world data points, but this is even very close. It like exactly fits every data points. But what can go wrong in this case? Can anyone from the audience tell? I mean, you can either use the chat box or you can unmute if it's hard to type. You can unmute for a while and tell the answer, and you can mute it back. I come again. This is a okay-ish fit where you can see like there's a large error between the data points and the predicted output. Here the error is very less, and it's a good fit. Here there is virtually zero errors. But I am telling it, this is the worst, one of the worst model. Like it is not a good model. It's a worst model. Do you know why is this a worst model? Though it fits every data points, why is this still a worst model? Can anyone from the audience? Oscillation is more. Can you be? I'm just looking for that one common word. Like, yeah, oscillation is more, but there is something happening on top of it. I'm just giving it a minute, and if not, I'm just carrying it forward. Okay, let me answer the example. Suppose say, when you start working with the machine learning techniques, you will observe one thing: the data is not clean. The data will never be clean. There will be always some errors in the data. For example, suppose if you take the data from a sensor, there will be noise. Or if you take an example from a text, there will be some unknown words, colloquial words like hey, and those kind of stuff. So in this case, suppose what if there's a error in the data? There is an error in this data. If there is an error in the data, this model is giving a average fit. Like it is not even fitting it completely, but this model is fitting it completely. If suppose your data has an error, this model will fit your error also, which means that you are not actually predicting it. You are just predicting with the error. Then that's bad. So that's why there is something called as overfitting and underfitting concept in regression. For example, this is underfitted. There is a clear curve data. Like when you see the data points, there is a clear curve, inherent curve in the curve pattern, but you still fit a line. As you can see, the error will increase because you can error will increase obviously for sure. And you by visualization, you yourself know that if you fit a curve, it will be good. Like if you fit a polynomial, it will be good. So as you could see, this is a good fit because it is fitting it in an average way. Like it's fitting in a good way, and it is not like going through every data points. It's not overfitting it, and this is called overfitting because it goes through every data point. Okay, so suppose if someone gives an unknown data point here, it will predict something else, and if suppose there is a huge noise in the output, the curve will fit the noise also. So that's why overfitting is very bad. You have to have a check on complexity whenever you run a machine learning algorithm. This is one of the examples which I took from internet. Like suppose given the ozone concentration, predicting the temperature of the atmosphere. So this is like one of some common example of where you can find like regression useful. So like I'll just give you two examples of how regression is generally used. Suppose you have to predict the temperature of the reactor, and there are two features, x1 and x2, sensor A, sensor B, and you have to predict the output. So what you actually do is, in a machine learning problem, you note the temperature also initially for a few times. You note the temperature also. You note the temperature of x1 and x2. So you have x1 and x2 and corresponding y. Now using this data, you have to find theta 1 and theta 2 in such a way that theta naught plus theta 1 x1 plus theta 2 x2 is close to y. This is the crux of the regression. Now let us see some real world example. Predict the time taken to reach a place. I repeat, predict the time taken to reach a place from one place to another. What do you think the features can be? Someone in the audience. I repeat again. We have to predict the time taken to reach a place from one place to another. What do you think can be the features? For example, here for measuring the temperature, we can use two sensor values. And in this case, what can be the features for predicting the time taken to reach the place? Someone from audience. It's very naive question. Suppose say if you're reaching from one place to another, say from let's say now I'm in Madurai. So suppose I am traveling from Madurai to Trichy. What are speed is like what can be the features? Speed is not an essentially a feature. Speed is derived from other feature. That's what I am trying to make here. Very simple thing. Distance. Good. Distance. Distance is one of the common feature which will determine the time. What is another important feature, especially in cities? Traffic. Good. That's spot on. So yeah, in order to predict the time, the features can be distance and traffic, and the time output is like that already you have a past data of how you have traveled it, and you have the time data, and you take and fit a. This is just a naive example, so I'm just giving it as a linear regression, but you can go fitting a polynomial regression and etc. So distance is so yeah, this is what Google Maps does. So they know the distance from the like maps from the data, but they'll take the traffic data. The traffic data is calculated by number of signals in the adjacent tower or something. So something like that. So that's how traffic is computed, and you predict the time output. I don't know what model they're using in Google Maps. Maybe it's a neural network or something. But in this case, let us assume that it's just a simple linear regression. So yeah, so this is something we have to answer before you do linear regression problem. Is there a relationship between the variables? Is the relationship linear? How strong is the relationship? How accurately can we estimate the relationship? How good is the model for prediction? So we already saw these two questions answered using the correlation. And how accurately can we estimate the relationship, and how good is the model for prediction purposes? That we have to measure in the background. So very common technique is to measure the error is to take the mean square error. Suppose these are the data points. These are the data points, actual true data points, and this is the line which we predicted, which we fitted. So what we just do is we just take the error and we square it. Error and square it. Take this error, square it. Take this error, square it. Do this for every data point and sum it together and take an average. So that is called as a mean squared error. can someone in the audience tell me why I need to square it? Why not like just take this difference, take this difference, take this difference and add it? I repeat, I told you now, we take the difference, square it and add it over all data points to find the error. Why not take just the difference and just add it? Why squaring it? Anyone from the audience? Cool. That's a spot on answer. Error should not be negative. Suppose, hey, in this case, this is our prediction and this is our actual value. Here, prediction minus actual value is negative. But here, prediction minus actual value is positive. So it can sum up to 0, which means that you can actually mislead telling there's no error, but there's actually an error. Now, what other I want this this is not important, but just asking you a question so as to understand it. Why can't I use an absolute value? What I'm telling is take the difference and do a mod operation, that is an absolute operation on it, and add it. Why can't I do that? Anyone from the audience? I repeat the question again on the spot. We take the difference and square it and add it. Why we need to square it? Why can't I take an absolute value of the error and add it over everywhere? What do you think can go wrong in that case? Okay, it's taking more time than anticipated. So let me tell you what's the actual answer. Suppose if you take absolute value and add it over every data points, what actually happens is you can't differentiate it. As we all know, it's in calculus we may have been studied that absolute, the modulus function at 0 is not differentiable. So that is actually a problem, because what you actually do is, this is how you train. I'm telling you fit a line, but I haven't told you yet how to fit a line, and I don't want to go deep into math. The introductory, since it's an introductory session, I don't want to go deep into the math, but let me tell you an idea about how it actually happens. So what you do is, suppose this is the error plane, error curve, error surface, and this is the I'm telling this is the error value, and this is the error for a domain space. What we actually do is we start with a random value of 1 sec. So actually we want to predict theta. We want to find theta naught, theta 1, and theta 2. What we actually do is we start with the random theta naught and theta 1, theta 2. Okay, and find what is the error for that particular parameters. And what we actually do is we run a gradient descent algorithm, and we go to the lowest error plane. That's how you find theta naught, theta 1, and theta 2. That's how you finally find the variables. So this is how you do curve fitting. I'm not going very deep into the math because it's just an introductory session. Yeah, but feel free to go through lectures by machine learning by Balaraman Ravindran in NPTEL, in case if you want to get some deep understanding of the math. He was my professor in IIT Madras. Sometimes you can't just use mean square error, because you need to go with some other metrics called as R2 score. It's not more important, but I'm telling you that people use this also as a mean to measure the performance, but it is not as important for today's agenda. And yeah, as I told, instead of using a linear regression, you can add x square, x cube, and make it as a polynomial regression. So in some cases the data will be actually complex. In those cases, you can feel free to go for higher powers. Yeah, classification. Classification is something which you'll see more in real life than regression. So what happened in regression? You have an input x, you have an output y. Output y is real. Given an x, you have to predict y, where y is a real number and not a are not a discrete value. But in case of a classification, sorry, oh, I missed the slide. Sorry. Okay, let me tell you. Let me tell you. In terms of classification, the input can be anything, like it can be real number or a class or something. But the output is a class. It can be class A or class B. It can be class, or it can be multi-class classification, like class 1, class 2, class 3. So the image recognition problem which we saw first is a classification problem where the input feature is an image of a cat, and output is an either it's a cat or a dog. Suppose if you want to, so that's a perfect example of a classification. This is one of the another example used by Andrew Ng in his lectures. Given a tumor size and age, to see whether the cancer can be malignant or benign. Suppose say you have a data of tumor size as well as age of a patient, and you plot it in a 2D plane. What pattern you can actually observe is this blue color circles. These are called malignant. These are called benign tumor, which means that it's not a serious case of tumor, but the red color X mark. This is called as a malignant tumor, which means it's a very serious form of tumor. So what? This is a typical example of a classification problem. The input is a tumor size and age, which are real numbers, and the output is a class. It's just a class. For example, this blue can be class 0 and X can be class 1. So here, like we can tell class 1, class 2 while discussing, but computer knows only binary, so it's the 0 or 1. So like this, when while training the algorithm, x1 will be the age, x2 will be the tumor size, both are integers, no problem, and y will be 0 or 1. Like you can model whatever you want. You can either take this as 0 or this as 0. So this is a typical example of a classification problem. This is a very cool example of classification. You must have seen this often in your while you browse your mail. Can someone in the audience give me what can be the input features that can be used to predict whether a given mail is spam or not? I repeat, I'm having a mail. I'm really sorry for the disturbance. Sorry, really sorry for the disturbance. Okay, now my question is this: I'm giving you a mail, and I'm asking you to predict whether it's a spam or not. So, what do you think can be the input feature as well as the class? Can someone in the audience explain? Okay, first explain about what can be the input feature. I repeat the question again. I'm giving you a mail, and I'm asking you to find whether it's a spam or not. So what can be the input features that will help you to recognize whether it's a spam or not? Someone from the audience in the chat box or the mic, someone. Was my question clear? If my question is not clear, please mention in the chat box. I can repeat it again. It's not like asking personal details. Someone has pointed out in mail. It's not like personal details. That can be, yeah. That's one of the good examples. Sorry, that's one of the good example. Recipient email address, advertising. Good, very good. That's the direction which I was expecting to go on. This is based on text. That's the text. So what Google actually does is they take the text of the entire mail and they process the text into some encodings. So this is a higher form of machine learning, which I'm not discussing today, but that is called as natural language processing. So what they do is they take the text, process it into a matrix, and check which pattern of matrix is a spam and which pattern of matrix is not a spam. So this is what Google does. So that's how the spam works, and it is Google spam prediction is one of the best algorithms in the entire web available. So this is an example of an input feature as well as an class. Image recognition. This is one of the cool. This is one of the main examples of classification. Yeah, only. This is one of the coolest example of classification. You take in an image, you give it as an input feature, and find the class. For example, just given an image, you can actually find if it's happy, sad, or angry. People have gone in such a way that even if the noise is too bad, that and even if you give a very low resolution image like 100 cross 100 resolution image, the computer is still finding the reaction. So the technology has gone to such an extent, and this is a very cool example of a classification. That is, input feature is an image, and output is happy, sad, or angry. This is another. And one more thing is, this is another example of multi-class classification. Like in the previous cases, we had only two classes: binary classification, either 0 or 1, spam or not spam. Here we have multi-class classification: happy, sad, angry, surprise, and extra. And this is just for someone who doesn't have an idea on computer vision. This is what an image is. Image is nothing but a data. So you have a matrix and you have values filled in between. So this is actually data. This is a very good data. So you have a matrix, and this is what you feed into a machine learning algorithm and find if it's true or false, or like find the respective classes. In terms of color image, there will be three matrices with red, green, and blue channel. Yeah, this is a very example of how to feed this value into the computer. For example, like as I told before, while speaking, we can tell class 1, class 2, spam, not spam, happy, sad, or angry. In colloquial terms, it's fine. But computer identifies only numbers. Computer knows only numbers. So when training a machine learning algorithm, you should use a number. In terms of binary classification, it's very easy. It's like 1 or 0. It's not a big deal. It's just a binary classification. But when it comes to a multi-class classification, you have to give one-hot encoding. That's like, suppose happy represents the first number, sad represents the second number, and angry represents the third number. So you have to make one for the particular reaction and make all the 0. That is called as one-hot encoding, and that is like typically what's shown in the example 100, 010, 001. By this you can represent the output class. Yes, linear classification is nothing but, suppose if this is a data point, a set of data points, and this is a set of another data points. Linear classification is nothing but the boundary must be linear. The separating boundary must be linear. So one of the best example of a linear classification is logistic regression. We'll just look in the next thing. Now a question contained like a biggest thing what we do in machine learning is, when it comes to classification, instead of telling it 0 or 1, generally we tell it what is the probability that this can belong to this class, this data belongs to this class. This is what we tell in most of the machine learning problems. But why probability? Because it is easy to interpret the class as a probability. Suppose say you're telling that using a machine learning algorithm, you're predicting a class output, but you are just 50% sure that this might belong to class 0. So in those cases, it's not better to tell it 0 or 1. Like suppose say for a very small problem like image recognition, it's fine. But let's take a very critical task like failure prediction in a nuclear power plant. Okay, suppose you have some sensors data and you have to predict whether the nuclear plant will fail or not. In those cases, suppose say if a machine learning algorithm is predicting that it won't fail with a probability of 51%. Do you think it's good? No, it can't be good, because 51% is a very less confidence. In that case, if you tell the power plant may not fail, there is 49% possible that power plant will fail. So in those crucial tasks, you need to mention the probability of your prediction also. That is a good practice. So that's why probability came into picture. Now I just want the audience to answer will be some of series of questions now. Suppose say I have data points. The star is a one set of data point. Like this is a completed data point, and the star belongs to class 0, and this circles belong to the class 1. Suppose you remember last in the linear regression we had y is equal to beta naught plus beta 1 x, where x is the input and y is the output, which is a real number. Suppose I'm saying you, what I'm asking you is, I want beta naught plus beta 1 x in such a way that p of x is the probability that the class belongs to that the data point belongs to class 1. I repeat again, I have an input data x, and I'm telling you that beta naught plus beta 1 x is equal to p of x, where p of x is the probability that this data point belongs to class 1. Sorry. Do you think it's a good model? If not, why is not a good model? Can someone from the audience? Meanwhile, I'll explain it again in so that you understand again. I have a data point. I have a data set where star belongs to class 0 and circle belongs to class 1. And these data points are x. Suppose I have beta naught plus beta 1 x, which is equal to p of x, such that p of x is the probability that the point x belongs to class 1. And I'm telling you this formula. What is the problem with this formula? Can someone in the audience let me know what can be the problem with this formula? That is, x is the input data, beta and beta 1 is some parameters, and p of x is the probability that the point x belongs to class 1. What is the underlying problem in this model, in this equation? Can someone in the audience please? It is not calculated for the other class, but okay, let us assume that it is just two classes, class 1 and class 0. Don't assume, like for now, let's neglect the case where there are multiple classes. Let's just assume there is just two classes, which means that suppose if you are predicting p of x as probability of class 1, then 1 minus probability of p of x is the probability of other class. So like indirectly you can calculate it for the other class. I hope you understood my problem. Dr. Srinivas Kakulku. Yeah, thank you, sir. Now let's come back to the question. What do you think is the probability of what do you think is the problem with this underlying equation? Okay, I'll give you a hint. I told you this is a probability. P of x is a probability. What is the general range of probability? Like, what is the range of probability? What can be the possible values of probability? Exactly. It can be only from 0 to 1. P of x can be only from 0 to 1. If suppose, like x is the x is a data point, and suppose say if beta naught and beta 1 is very large value, then beta naught plus beta 1 x can be highly positive. It can be greater than 1, which is not at all possible because probability always lies between 0 and 1. So that's the problem here. Probability should always fall between only 0 and 1. This model does not take care of that. So this is the problem with this model. Now that's where logarithm comes into the picture. Suppose say, instead of telling that here we had beta naught plus beta 1 x, the probability of the point belonging to class 1. Suppose I'm saying if p of x is the probability that the data point belongs to class 1, but instead of just using only p of x, I'm using log of p of x is equal to beta naught plus beta 1 x. It is better, but it still has a problem. Can you find that problem? Someone in the audience? I repeat again. Here, what I told is, if beta naught is large and beta 1 is large, and if x is also positive, then this sum can be greater than 1, which is not possible because probability should always fall between 0 and 1. Suppose say, instead of this equation, I am making it something like log of p of x is equal to beta naught plus beta 1 x. What do you think can be problem in this case? Someone from the audience, please. Uh, yeah, someone in the audience is giving a spot on answer. That's good. Yeah, cool. I think you got an idea about it. So what actually happens is, suppose if beta naught plus beta 1x is negative, then it's fine, because in this case, if beta naught plus beta 1x is negative, it cannot be possible because probability can't be negative. In this case, if beta naught plus beta 1x is negative, there's no problem because log of a fraction is always a positive number. It's a negative number. So log of p of x, now here it makes sure that even if the beta naught plus beta 1x is negative, p of x is still valid. But what the problem is, in case beta naught plus beta 1x is very, very large, p of x can exceed 1. So while using log of p of x, you are just making sure that this can't be negative, but you are not taking of the other case where this value can be so large. I hope you got. I hope you understood. Okay, so you are just bounding on only one side. That is, when if this is negative, you are bounding it so that there is no problem in the probability. But if it is a large positive value, still p of x can be greater than 1, which we do not want. So that's the problem here, because p of x in this case can be from 0 to infinity, but what we actually want is 0 to 1. That's when the logistic regression like popped up. So now look here, instead of log of p of x equal to beta naught plus beta 1x, we are just making it log of p of x by 1 minus p of x is equal to beta naught plus beta 1 into x. Now, even if it is negative, p of x will be 0 to 1. Even if it is positive, p of x will be 0 to 1. And like for whatever the value of beta naught plus beta 1x, p of x will always fall between 0 and 1. So we got our final required target. That is, x is the input, beta naught and beta 1 are the parameters. We are coming up with a model in such a way that p of x is the probability close to when p of x is the probability of the point belonging to class 1. So we need to find beta naught and beta 1 in such a way that our prediction matches with the actual data. That's what I have written. If beta naught plus beta 1x is non-negative, then we get probability greater than 0.5. In which case you can tell output y equal to 1. Otherwise, you can tell y equal to 0. And this threshold 0.5 is not necessary. In most cases, we can increase the threshold to 0.8, or we can decrease the threshold for convenience, depending on the problems. So this p of x equal to this equation is just written from this equation. Like just interchange the equations, and we got to this equation. This p of x is the probability of the point x belonging to class 1. Now this probability is bounded between 0 to 1. So this is the logistic regression. As I told, there is always an error function. Again, like in linear regression, where I told curve fitting, but I did not tell you how to fit a curve. Likewise in logistic regression, I told you how to construct a probability, how to guess the probability, but I did not tell how to find this beta naught and beta 1. Again, that is a bit of advanced math topics. If you want to read about it, again I am recommending the machine learning lectures by Balaraman Ravindran in NPTEL. Sir, Balaraman sir and Ravindran sir in Ravindran sir's NPTEL lecture. It's very good because it has every derivative, like every algorithm is properly explained, like the math behind the problems. Okay, in case of logistic regression, in case of linear regression, we had a mean square error. But in case of logistic regression, we have what is called as the log loss function, where y is the actual output, y dash is the predicted value, predicted probability, and that's how you calculate the loss. One of the beauty in this algorithm is, suppose if your y is 1, your class is 1, or if suppose say your actual class is 1, then this term will vanish away because there is 1 minus y inside it. This term will vanish away. If your y equal to 1, this term will vanish away. So only this term will remain. And since y is equal to 1, minus log y dash will be your loss function. Suppose say you are predicting y dash is a very small probability, say like 0.1 or 0.2. Log of 0.2 is negative, and negative and negative will become a large positive value. So which means that you're increasing the loss. It's clear, right? Because if y equal to 1, you have to predict y dash close to 1. And if y equal to 0, you have to predict y dash close to 0. So this logistic loss function will take care of that. Will take care of our requirements. Okay, gone are the math, the intensive math-based machine learning algorithms. Now let us come to most intuitive algorithms. K nearest neighbors. This is the most intuitive algorithm ever in machine learning. Very, very easy to explain. Very simple. The target is very simple. What you have is you already have a data point where blue belongs to class 1 and red belongs to class 2. What does K nearest neighbor algorithm do is, given a data point, it will see the nearest 3 neighbors. For example, in case this is the data point and we see the nearest 3 neighbors. And we see that we take the majority voting for the class. For example, here, let us say, we take this point, it takes the nearest 3 neighbors, sees like what are the class of the nearest neighbors, and takes a majority voting, see like which classes are major around it, and predicts that class for the given data point. As you can see here, this is the data point. It sees the nearest 3 neighbors. 2 neighbors are blue and 1 neighbor is red. So the maximum number of the maximum class is blue class. So you predict the point as blue, like predict the class as blue. So this is how K nearest neighbors work, and this K is a number which you feed into the network, which you feed into the algorithm based on the data. For example, here in this case, K is equal to 3. Suppose you give K equal to 5, it will take the nearest 5 points and takes a majority voting among those 5 points. So this is the most intuitive algorithm you can find in K nearest neighbors, in machine learning algorithms. And yeah, and classes are allotted as per majority voting, and you need to mention the parameter K. So that parameter K, you need to properly mention it. Like why KNN, it's simple to infer. There is no parametric, like there is no theta 1, there is no beta 1, there is no probability. It is just a non-parametric thing and very simple to infer. When not to use KNN, when the data set is very large. Suppose say the data set is very large. This calculation, the distance calculation. For first example, if someone asks you what are the 3 nearest neighbors, what will you do? You will just calculate the distance between all the data points. Calculating distance between all the data points can be pretty much computationally intensive if the data set is very large. So we cannot use when the data set is very large. And non-linear decision boundaries. This looks very good for linear decision boundaries. For example, here there is a linear decision boundary here. Linear decision boundary means, suppose if I draw a line here, you can easily classify between class A and class B. But if there is a very complex decision boundary, you can't use K nearest neighbors. And other problems is like selection of K. The selection of K is a very big problem because you don't know what actually K is. You have to do some pre-processing before selecting the K. Another big problem is the presence of noise, and higher dimensions, it is computationally intensive. And one of the biggest advice which I will give for someone who is doing machine learning problem is feature scaling. What you do is, suppose you have 2 different variables, say temperature and humidity. The temperature ranges from 230 to 400 Kelvin, and humidity ranges from 0 to 1. Suppose if you are running a machine learning algorithm with 2 variables together, that can be a misinterpretation. Since the temperature range is inherently larger than the humidity, the algorithm will give a more weightage to the temperature range. So what we have to generally do is, before running a machine learning algorithm, you have to scale it. Scaling it means take the mean of the temperatures and divide it. This is a very good practice for machine learning. And this is another example of underfitting and overfitting. I hope you remember what I meant by underfitting and overfitting in terms of linear regression, where we had 2 variables, where we had a curve fitting where if it is a linear case, we had a straight line, we had a when it's x square, we had a polynomial curve, but as x increases, it tends to overfit every point. So that happens in k nearest neighbors also, because when you, for example, in this case for k equal to 1, the boundary it sees is very less. Like the nearest, because you're just taking one neighbor, looking what it is, and you're predicting the output. So as you could see, for one neighbor, when you take this one neighbor, the decision boundary is very overfitted. Like it is very sharp. As you can see, like there is a separate boundary here in between the red region. So this happens when k equal to 1. That is like when k equal to 1, it overfits. And when k equal to 99, it underfits. For example, here you can see there are a lot of blue points here. There are a lot of blue points here, but still the decision boundary is predicting this. And there are a lot of red points in this blue region. So when k equal to 99, it underfits. So what is the good practice is you have to run k from 1 to 99 and look which value of k on an average gives you a better result. That's how k nearest neighbors works, and that's how we have to fill in the k, that is the number of neighbors. Okay, can I extend for KNN for regression? Yes. K nearest neighbors can also be used for regression. What does it actually do is, suppose say if this is the data point and you give k equal to some, if this is the data point and you give some k equal to 10, what does the algorithm does is, it chooses the nearest 10 neighbors and take an average of the value. That it reports as the output value. So that's how k nearest neighbors regression works. This is the last segment of our machine learning techniques. Decision trees classifier. This is the most another intuitive algorithm. Decision trees is nothing but a, this is like as the name suggests, it's a decision based algorithm. It's a tree based algorithm. Suppose say if you want to predict whether the person is fit or not, this is just a very naive example. Suppose if age is less than 30, yes or no. Yes, eats a lot of pizzas, unfit. No, fit. Exercise in the morning, yes, fit. No, unfit. So as you can see, what it actually does is, it looks for the logic in between in the data, given data, and it classifies the algorithm. So what we actually do is, suppose say in this case we have three classes. Class 0, which is the red one, class 1, which is the blue one, and class 2, which is the green one. So we have three sets of data, and suppose if we want to build a decision tree cluster, what we actually do is we partition the domain space. We partition the entire 2D. In this case, it's a Cartesian coordinate. We partition the domain space into three regions such a way that we are reducing the overall error. This is how the decision tree classifier works. For example, putting in word, like suppose if putting in words like this, what we can actually tell is, if for example, if y is less than 0.5, classify it as red. If y is greater than 0.5, as well as x is less than 5, classify it as blue, else classify it as green. So this is how decision tree classifier works. It looks for a pattern in data by partitioning the domain space. And like every other algorithm, there is a metric that is used to tune your machine learning model. For example, in linear regression, we saw mean square error. In logistic regression, we saw logistic loss. And in terms of decision trees, we have Gini index. So what is Gini index is, for every partition space, it takes the probability of one class and multiplies with 1 minus p of mk. So we try to minimize this. So when will this we try to maximize the Gini index. So when will this be actually maximum? Suppose say it is a very simple question. P into 1 minus p, when it will be maximum? For what value of p will p into 1 minus p be maximum? Someone in the audience? What I'm telling is, suppose p is the probability that the probability of the class, for P is the ratio of the class. What is, okay, let me just, it's a bit indulged and convoluted. Let me just tell you what does it happens. So in this case, if suppose there is another data point, suppose if there's a blue data point within this red region, so what we actually do is we take the ratio for each class, multiply it with 1 minus p, and sum it over all the data, all the regions. So in this case, 1 p into 1 minus p will be maximum when p is equal to 0.5. Just think of the example. Like we know that p always falls between 0 and 1. When p is 0, p into 1 minus p is 0. When p is 1, p into 1 minus p is again 0. This p into 1 minus p is maximum when p is 0.5. So that's how it works. So while minimizing the Gini index, what we actually make sure is that the probability is either 0 or 1. In other words, in a given region, there is only one class and not a mixture of classes. This is what decision tree classifier does. Yeah, there are something here, even here, there is overfitting and underfitting concept. For example, if you keep on splitting, the depth of the split means, suppose if you keep on splitting like into multiple regions, there may be a chance that you might overfit, as well as the number of data points in the leaf nodes. Can we extend the decision trees to regression? Yes, you can surely extend this to regression. In this case, we use the decision tree to classify. In case of regression, what we do is we again split this partition space, and for reporting the regression value, we take the average among these values. So that's how we can do regression on decision trees. So random forest is an extension of decision trees. What we actually do is, instead of a single decision tree, we take multiple decision trees. Multiple trees, grow each tree and take a majority voting of all the trees. Take a combined observation of all the trees. So that is called as random forest. Forest is nothing but a collection of trees, right? So that's what it intuitively means. Instead of fitting a single decision tree, you take multiple decision trees, grow it, and you take and you report the output by combining output of all the decision trees. So that is the random forest concept. So how do you classify? Like for example, in mean square error, you came up with the in regression you came up with the mean square error. That's nothing but the like how good your model is. In terms of classification, you have to report the accuracy. Accuracy is total number of predictions by total size of the data set. This accuracy. Sometimes you need to actually instead of just mentioning the accuracy alone, you have to report precision, recall, F1 accuracy, and specificity scores. As you can see, these are other metrics which you can use for use for your classification. This thing will come in handy when your data set is unbalanced. For example, you have 100 data points, out of which 90 belongs to class 1 and 10 belongs to class 0. You can, your machine learning algorithm can predict everything as class 1. I repeat, your data has 100 points in which 90 points belongs to class 1 and 10 points belong to class 0. What you can naively do is predict everything as positive, which means that till you get 90 correct answers and 10 wrong answers, 90 correct predictions and 10 incorrect predictions, which means your accuracy will still be 0.9, which is a very high accuracy, but it's not actually true, right? Because there is we are predicting everything positive because of the imbalanced data set. Because we have 90 positive examples and 10 negative examples. Predominantly, the positive examples are higher. That's why they get 90% accuracy. So this accuracy is need not be the best metric. So it's generally good to report your answers with measures of precision, recall, F1, and specificity. So this so whenever you do a machine learning classification, you have to report all these scores. Only after you report all these scores, you can be sure that your model is good. I think this is the end of what I have prepared for this session. And as I told, I promised the last 10 minutes for question answers in case you may have some doubts. I am happy to take it in case if you have some doubts in the audience.
Either you could use the chat box or you could unmute, ask your doubts, and mute back again.
Participants, please unmute and raise the question for our resource person. Or post in the chat.
Yeah, if you have some doubts, you can ask me now by unmuting your mic, or you could use the chat box. I know today has been I didn't go deep into any topic today, but I just gave you an overview of everything on top so that you just have an idea of different fields, different examples of how to go about a machine learning problem. That's why I just gave a broad analysis and not an in-depth analysis. So yeah, any doubts in any part where you found it, like any doubts in any part of the slides, or do you have some doubts which is not in the slides? Even I am ready to answer those questions.
Participants, please ask your query.
Yeah, I know this is a very long session, so I wish.
It's more interactive sessions. So there is no questions, I think.
Are you sure? Okay, fine then. If there's no questions, I'm happy to close the session. And thanks for being a wonderful audience. And yeah, and this is my first formal presentation. So if there was some grammatical error or some English error or some presentation error, please pardon me and excuse me. I'll try to improve the next time.
Okay. Thank you, sir.
That's actually a question here. I am from power systems background. How do we do load forecasting using machine learning and using it in decision making? Yeah, sure. Thank you, Harini madam, for the question. I will just explain you. Since I am not a mechanical engineering. Since I am from a mechanical engineering background, I don't have much idea about the power system, but I can give you an idea how to go about it. In your case, your load is an output. Okay, so your load is the output we have to predict. So you already have, you must think about some features that can affect your load. Since I am not from electrical engineering background, I can't think of the feature. But what I'm telling is, you have the load as an output. You have to think about some variables that can influence your load. You need to give the data. You need to collect the data from the past experience, like past experiences. For example, if suppose if you're choosing two features, feature 1 and feature 2. If feature 1 is this value, feature 2 is this value, then load is the output. This is like this. You have to collect a lot of examples, collect the examples together, and you can use any regression techniques for your load forecasting. I hope that answers your question. And Mr. Altaf has asked, gradient descent is same as the error concept discussed. Yeah, gradient descent is same as the error concept discussed. Yeah, gradient descent is nothing but a math tool for what you have to for optimizing your models. So yeah, it's same as the error gradient descent is nothing but reducing the error. And Dr. Srirama Murthy is asking one more question. The difference between machine learning techniques and AI techniques, optimization technique, parameter techniques, available there. That's true. That's a lot of literature available out in the internet, as I told. Sometimes it can be misleading because see, machine learning is a very wide topic. There are statisticians who do this. There are computer scientists who do this. And say, like for example, I am a software engineer, computer scientist. So I have one type of interpretation, and there is finance engineers. Even finance is a very huge topic. Machine learning and finance is a very huge topic. So they have their own way of interpretation. The robotics people have their own way of interpretation. So there are a lot of interpretations available in the literature. As I told, there are a lot of good lectures in the NPTEL and as well as in the Coursera. where you can go and observe it and find it out. Yeah, and Google is the best teacher ever, as I tell everyone. Yeah, I think that answers all the questions, and thank you everyone for being a wonderful audience today. Uh, uh, it was a good session. Thank you, thanks everyone. And yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
I'm audible.
Yeah. You're audible, ma'am.
Yeah, okay. Thank you, sir. Thank you so much for this more informative and interesting session. This session engaged with the presentation with the full of images, sir, which helped us for trouble-free learning and understanding the concept of machine learning, sir.
Thank you so much, ma'am. Thank you so much. It's a pleasure.
This was the more active and interactive session. We enjoyed a lot with this technical session, not technical. It's a technical interaction session.
Yes,
Thank
ma'am.
you,
Yes, ma'am.
participants. Thank you, participants, for this active response to Karthik, sir. Thank you, sir. Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you so much. Thank you everyone. Bye.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. Sir, participants, please note the next session starts at 11:30. You may take some time. You join again at 10:25 a.m. through the same link, sir. So thank you, participants. Thank you.